Welcome to this critique where today's manuscript follows a restless wanderer named Ishmael as he travels to Nantucket, befriends a heavily tattooed harpooner named Pequod, and signs aboard the ominous whaling ship Pequod.
And jumping right into the feedback, the material here is undeniably brilliant, with rich philosophical depth, but it really requires some structural refinement to maximize the reader's engagement right from page 1.
Front-loading the manuscript with extensive etymological definitions and historical extracts creates a formidable barrier to entry before the narrative even begins.
It really does. Getting the reader onto the ship and invested is everything, but we hit this wall of text first.
Right. Okay, so what I really like about this part is the sheer depth of the research,
Oh, absolutely.
You're making a strong case for the whale's mythological and historical significance. Highlighting ancient Hebrew translations, quotes from Darwin, King Alfred, it shows profound dedication.
The texture of it is wonderful. It feels like stepping into a dusty 19th century archive.
Exactly. But the distinct weakness here is that placing these etymology and extract sections before Chapter 1 completely disrupts the initial narrative hook.
Yeah, you're asking the reader to wade through dozens of quotes from Genesis and Job, and even a fictional sub-librarian, all before they even meet the protagonist.
It delays that immediate compelling voice.
Right, before the opening lines of the story, the reader has to parse through pages of dense academic framing.
It's a huge demand on the reader's patience. You open a novel expecting a story, and instead you hit what feels like a dictionary.
A massive history lesson before the fictional dream is even established.
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like utilizing these incredible historical fragments differently?
Yes, absolutely. My suggestion is to relocate these preliminary sections so they serve as chapter epigraphs or maybe an end-of-book appendix.
Oh, that's a great idea.
This allows the reader to immediately connect with the protagonist's forward momentum without losing the rich historical texture.
By shifting the architecture, we allow the narrator to welcome the reader aboard first.
Establish the stakes, the tone, those freezing Nantucket streets, before zooming out to the grand historical lineage.
Let's look at some concrete examples for improvement here. Instead of a standalone extract section sitting at the very beginning, you could take that fantastic quote from the Book of Job.
The Leviathan maketh the path to shine after him.
Yes, that one. And use it as an epigraph for a later chapter dealing directly with the whale's majesty.
Or right before the ship's first encounter with a spout.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the sub-librarian himself?
Such a delightful melancholic invention.
Right? You could move that charming introduction into a foreword, or better yet, make it an interlude later in the text, once the ship has actually sailed.
Or just group them as a comprehensive appendix that the protagonist explicitly directs the reader to reference.
Of course, these are just a few out of all the possible ways you could solve this problem.
But implementing one of these strategies will clear the runway so that fantastic opening chapter can take flight immediately.
Moving on to pacing. The complete uninterrupted transcription of Father Maple's sermon totally stalls the forward momentum of the protagonist's physical journey to the sea.
It really grinds things to a halt.
Let's look closely at this section discussing the whaleman's chapel. The scene leading up to the sermon is incredibly evocative.
The freezing sleet, the memorial tablets on the walls.
And that profoundly atmospheric entrance of the chaplain climbing a rope ladder into a ship bow pulpit. It is masterfully staged.
Palpable atmosphere. You can almost smell the damp wool.
But the weakness is that dedicating an entire lengthy chapter to a verbatim theatrical monologue stops the actual plot.
Right as the protagonist is actively preparing to leave for his voyage.
It's a massive, unbroken block of text that risks losing the reader's engagement. We completely leave the protagonist's point of view to read a transcribed speech about Jonah.
It forces the reader into a passive state. The sermon is thematically brilliant.
And establishes the moral weight of the ocean perfectly.
But the delivery method turns our active protagonist into a passive stenographer just sitting in a pew.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on the unbroken dialogue of the sermon might overlook the protagonist's internal emotional journey during this pivotal moment?
That is exactly the risk. So the suggestion to fix this pacing drag is to condense the sermon by weaving the protagonist's internal reactions and environmental observations throughout the delivery.
Focus the spoken text only on the most crucial thematic beats.
Right. The thematic weight of Jonah's disobedience is vital, but it needs to be filtered through the lens of the character about to risk his own life on those waters.
Let's explore some concrete examples of how to execute this. You could definitely keep the powerful opening hymn and Father Mapple climbing the rope ladder.
Those physical details are too good to lose.
But you might summarize the middle sections of the Jonah retelling through the protagonist's wandering thoughts and anxieties about his upcoming voyage.
One might argue that summarizing loses Mapple's unique, thunderous voice.
True, but you can preserve his voice while breaking up the dense text by having the protagonist physically observe the space.
For example, have the narrator watch the widows in the congregation reacting to Mapple's delivery of the line, "out of the belly of hell."
Yes, or have him notice the storm violently rattling the chapel windows, just as Mapple describes the tempest striking Jonah's ship.
That makes it so much more cinematic.
Having the narrator reflect on his own reasons for going to sea as the sermon reaches its climax maintains that terrifying awe of the scene while tightening the pacing.
It keeps the narrator active, and again, there are a dozen different ways you could handle this pacing issue.
These are really just a few options out of all the possible ways to solve it. The goal is just to ensure the narrative drive survives the sermon.
Absolutely.
So once we get on the water, the fleeting treatment of Bulkington promises a significant character arc that is abruptly truncated, leaving us with a real sense of unfulfilled narrative potential.
A key theme in this material seems to be the deliberate introduction of fascinating maritime figures.
Queequeg, the spouter and landlord, Captains Pelican Bildad, they all feel vivid and essential.
They leap right off the page. But the weakness here is that Bulkington is introduced with immense reverence, and then he is discarded almost immediately.
He's highlighted early on as a standout figure among the Grampus's crew, a man who holds aloof from the others.
And then he is described as a demigod, seeking the open independence of her sea. The text builds this deep, poetic mystique around him.
You build this guy up to be an absolute legend, and then he is dismissed in what the text itself literally calls a 6-inch chapter.
It creates a really jarring imbalance.
It raises the reader's expectations for a character who vanishes from the plot right after being framed as vital to the thematic core of the journey.
If you spend that much narrative currency on a character, the reader naturally assumes they are going to follow that character into the fire.
Is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
Right now, the setup of Bulkington and his ultimate payoff feels like a dropped thread.
When he disappears into a stoneless grave after half a page, the reader feels slightly betrayed.
My suggestion is to either integrate Bulkington more actively into the ongoing crew dynamics aboard the ship, or to repurpose his philosophical weight onto a character who actually remains central to the narrative.
We need to align the amount of textual real estate given to a character with their actual importance to the plot.
Let's see how we can strengthen this with some concrete examples. If the author wants to keep Bulkington in the story, you could allow him to interact organically with the mates during the chaotic departure scenes.
The Merry Christmas chapter.
Exactly. Have him assist in securing the boom alongside Queequeg.
Or have Captain Peleg specifically call him out by name, just to anchor his physical presence on the crew before launching into the grand philosophical musings.
That works well. I wonder, though, if we've considered an alternative approach where Bulkington is removed entirely.
Oh, that's interesting.
You could easily transfer the powerful metaphor of the lee shore, the idea that safety on land is actually the soul's direst jeopardy, to the protagonist's own internal monologue.
Let the narrator look out at the freezing waves during his very first night watch and realize that his own restlessness is driving him away from the safety of the port.
You take that beautiful truth meant for Bulkington and use it to deepen our understanding of our main character.
That's just one tool in the toolbox. And these examples are just a few out of all possible ways of solving the character imbalance.
But either expanding his footprint or redistributing his thematic weight will definitely fix the issue.
Now, let's talk about the advocate chapter. The sudden shift into a defensive, essay-like justification of the whaling profession jarringly pulls the reader out of the established fictional dream.
Right when the ship sets sail, the narrative grinds to a halt.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the author wants to elevate the status of the whaleman.
To prove to the reader that this is a noble, historically significant, and economically vital profession.
Which is a totally valid authorial goal. The information itself is genuinely fascinating.
The idea that whalemen are the true global pioneers, opening up Australia and South America.
But the weakness is that this chapter completely abandons the immersive, narrative-driven world of the ship's departure.
Just as the Pequod has blindly plunged like fate into the lone Atlantic, the text stops the story to directly address the reader with historical data.
Financial statistics like the $20 million value of the fleet, defensive appeals regarding the respectability of the trade.
It feels much more like an authorial intrusion than a natural progression of the story.
It turns our narrator from a vulnerable participant in a grand adventure into a defensive lecturer at a podium. When you step on stage to hand out statistics, the continuous fictional dream breaks.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of dramatizing this information within the world itself?
I like where you're going with this.
The suggestion is to dramatize these defenses of the whaling industry through organic character dialogue or to integrate the historical prestige seamlessly into the world building.
Rather than presenting it as a direct, standalone, argumentative essay.
We want the reader to feel the majesty and danger of whaling through the action and the characters, rather than being explicitly told to respect it.
For concrete examples for improvement, you could dramatize this exact information earlier in the manuscript during a natural scene of conflict.
Yes, have Captain Peleg or Captain Bildad boast about the £1 million British bounties while they are aggressively negotiating the protagonist's sleigh.
When Bildad is stubbornly arguing for the 777th lay, he could easily justify his stinginess by citing the massive capital at risk and the global economic impact of their specific voyage.
Or let the protagonist reflect on the global impact of the whale ship while he marvels at the cosmopolitan crew loading the vessel.
As he watches the riggers and the harpooneers working, he could internally marvel that these rough men have mapped uncharted archipelagos.
Keeping the information rooted in an active scene, tied directly to the physical reality of the ship and the sweat of the crew, solves the pacing issue instantly.
Obviously, these suggestions are just a few out of all possible ways to handle the exposition.
But the key is to show the nobility of the profession through the narrative, rather than stopping the narrative to argue the point.
To quickly recap our critique today, we have identified 4 key areas for high-level structural refinement. First, relocating the opening etymology and extracts to epigraphs or an appendix to clear the runway for the immediate narrative hook.
Second, breaking up the pacing drag of Father Mapple's sermon by weaving in the protagonist's active observations and physical reactions to the chapel environment.
Third, fulfilling the narrative promise of the Bulkington character by either expanding his active role in the crew dynamics or transferring his profound philosophical weight directly to the narrator.
And finally, dramatizing the essay-like defenses of the whaling industry into active dialogue and organic world-building rather than relying on standalone argumentative chapters. We highly encourage the writer to implement these structural and pacing adjustments.
By addressing these areas, you will effortlessly maintain the story's incredible philosophical depth and its striking character work,
while ensuring a seamless, gripping experience for the reader, from the spouter in all the way out into the deep, open ocean.
We warmly invite you to submit your revised work back in for another critique once you've had a chance to experiment with these suggestions. Keep writing, keep refining your craft, and we look forward to seeing where this incredible voyage goes next.